Next question. This is a cool one. Have you heard anything about how old school Green Berets physically prepared for SFAS? Curious about it. Yeah. So, I mean, I've heard definitely some stories, especially from older guys that went in before anyone knew really anything about selection, let alone how to properly train for it. And the best way I can describe it is it was very specific. And this is generalization. This is not how everybody trained, of course, but from what I've heard and what I've seen, their training was very specific, but not really all that well structured. So specific meaning they did a lot of things that they knew they were going to do at selection: rucking, running, calisthenics, carries. And honestly, that's mostly what my training looked like, other than SOPSI, where they had us do a bunch of other non-specific things. But if you're good at those things, really, really good at those things, you're probably setting yourself up for success. Of course, if you're like really, really weak and you just happen to be good at carrying things in your hands, you may struggle a little bit underneath the apparatuses. You may struggle a little bit to wear that ruck day after day after day, but you're pretty much covering all your bases if your selection prep plan has those things in it. Of course, there are a million different ways to structure it. And I can tell you from what I've heard, old school Green Berets did not structure it very well. They just went hard and ham and probably overtrained and did way too much and didn't really manage their intensity or their volume very well. But that should go to show you that specificity, and I talk about this all the time, is very, very important. That is probably the number one thing, is training for the right things, making your training very specific to what you're going to be tested on. Now, I think one of the major issues is so many people are able to go on the internet and just write and type and claim whatever they want. Like, you need to do this, this, and this. You need to train this way. You need to do this lift. You need to be able to lift this much weight. You should go and ruck with 90 pounds, 100 pounds, whatever it is. And some people, not really through fault of their own, don't really know any better. So they'll be like, oh, that must be part of the process. That must be something I have to do. And one of my life missions, basically, since I started Terminator Training Method, is to dispel these myths and make sure people are doing the right things and not doing a bunch of ridiculous stuff that is not going to help them, or even worse and even more commonly, going to detract from their potential results or hurt themselves or whatever it is. So I would say most of the time, older school Green Berets just did what they thought was right. And even if it wasn't perfect, even if it wasn't exactly the way that maybe training should be structured, it was specific enough and it got them better at certain things that they needed to be doing at selection. And so therefore it worked. Also, in general, of course, this is a very general statement, but guys back then were just more tough. They had less distractions. They had less potential things that they could have as vices. And they didn't really have the time to overanalyze things and gather information and weigh different options. They're just like, I'm going to selection. I'm going to start training for selection. I don't know anything about selection other than the fact that we're going to ruck and we're going to run. We're going to carry things. We're going to do calisthenics. So guess what? I'm going to do those things and I'm going to go really hard because, of course, selection's hard and they show up. And even if they're not perfectly exactly as fit as they could have otherwise been, if everything was structured better, they still were sufficiently ready. And usually they were more mentally tough. They had more grit and they had less of the problems that the current generation going to selection potentially has unless they curate their life to avoid those problems. So very cool question. And yeah, that's my best shot at answering it.